Garchomp is on the rise, folks. The allegations were false. Many thought that this Pokemon's career was over, but he's got some fight left in him. It is not, in fact, Garchover, as many have suggested. But if you've been living under a rock, you might be surprised to learn that Garchomp ever left. What do you mean? Isn't this the strongest Pokemon ever? Well, in Gen 9, Garchomp has had an interesting experience, hasn't it? Falling out of the OU tier for the first time in its long career. Garchomp has struggled to keep up with modern times, as new and exciting ground-type utility Pokemon like Great Tusk, Iron Treads, and Ting-Lu have hit the scene. These are either bulkier, more threatening, or more useful than Garchomp. Even though Garchomp still has very well-rounded stats, that fantastic Dragon Ground typing, and a great move pool with a lot of different coverage options, and now it even has access to spikes, it still fails to stack up to all these other ground types. It's a crowded role. There's Gliscor now, there's Landorus Therian returning back to the forefront. It doesn't feel like there's much of a place for Garchomp, or at least so we thought. Although Garchomp might not be quite at the level of its peers, it is still not useless. This is still a good Pokemon. The most popular way to use Garchomp in Gen 9 has been the Tank Chomp set, a largely defensive Garchomp, taking advantage of the ability Rough Skin. Rough Skin punishes enemies that make contact by dealing chip damage to them, dealing a hefty 1/8 of their HP if they make contact. By stacking a Rocky Helmet on top for further contact damage, Garchomp is a great punish to Pokemon using U-Turn or Rapid Spin or any old physical move that makes contact. Garchomp stands out from other bulky ground types with access to hazards because of its great dual typing. It is a rare dragon type neutral to both water and grass, and that is a big deal. Ting-Lu, Great Tusk, Gliscor, Iron Treads, all of these Pokemon are vulnerable to water. Many of them are vulnerable to grass. Garchomp is not. Garchomp also has access to Dragon Tail, a way to phase enemies out while attacking them at the same time, with a bit of stab damage. A good fit on a Pokemon whose goal is to set hazards. This team right here was conceived by the player CTC, who is also a world-famous musician. And it was built upon by the player Joltinjoe, who you may recognize from his iconic Probopass team that I've covered on the channel before. This team right here used Garchomp on it, and it managed to hit #1 on the planet. It peaked #1. And that's a big deal for a Pokemon that many thought wasn't up to standard anymore, isn't it? This team happens to double up on bulky ground types with both Great Tusk and Garchomp. And both of them have different defensive roles. Garchomp, of course, has those unique defensive traits: water and grass neutrality, resistance to fire, and Great Tusk isn't carrying any hazards, instead focusing purely on attacks and rapid spin. Ice types and fairy types that threaten Garchomp can be very well covered by this Assault Vest Alamamola, who of course resists ice and shrugs off most special hits thanks to the Assault Vest, and this Slowking Galar, who resists fairy. The defensive core is quite strong here. This team is not completely passive. Ting-Lu would be much more passive. Garchomp, with its ability to generate that chip damage simply by taking hits and switching in, is more aggressive than Ting-Lu is. Garchomp's Earthquake is useful, and this Pokemon is also a very effective check to Pokemon like Iron Moth, and half of a check to Ogerpon Wellspring, because you at least are neutral to water and grass, unlike every other relevant ground type. That Pokemon will still threaten you significantly, but this team is fast-paced. If you can get them out of there in the short term, establish some hazards, and maybe bring Garchomp in one last time for that Rocky Helmet plus Rough Skin chip damage, I think the rest of the team can do a pretty good cleanup job. You've got Dragapult and Meowscarada as the offensive generators, and Great Tusk as well, who can get speed with Rapid Spin and hit a lot of stuff with this ground ice coverage combo. With Garchomp to set up these Pokemon with its hazards and its chip damage, these can clean up very, very well. And Garchomp fits much better here than Ting-Lu would. And this is kind of a perfect recipe for success in Gen 9, isn't it? It's a fast-paced environment. You don't want to run something too passive that can't keep up with that pace. This is a very nicely structured team that plays well into Garchomp's strengths and shows that this is a competent and solid Pokemon that offers something its counterparts do not, and provides a key component to a #1 ranked team. Garchomp's usage hasn't just been rising on the ladder either, because at the highest level of tournament play, Garchomp has been on the rise too. There have been 4 uses so far of Garchomp in SPL in the first week, which is pretty considerable. And the way people are running Garchomp at the top level is a little interesting. This team from the player Electric Wind would look like a complete stall team, using Garchomp as a tanky Pokemon that can set hazards and rack up chip damage, but this Garchomp is running an interesting moveset option of Outrage. The only moves revealed on this set were Earthquake and Outrage. I have to imagine it was running at least Spikes as well, but Outrage was a pretty important option here, and on this otherwise extremely passive team, Garchomp's simple Outrage was able to apply pressure to Tinglu and Rillaboom and get some good chip damage on them, while also racking up that Rough Skin Rocky Helmet chip damage. This odd Garchomp Talonflame semi-stall, I don't even know what to call this, was victorious against a pretty metagame looking team from Crying, and I think that that's a pretty impressive showing, and perhaps a new development on Garchomp running Outrage on it for some breaking power that was clearly not anticipated from the enemy. The player ZS took an interesting approach to using Garchomp with a fairly aggressive hazard stacking strategy where Garchomp was not running the standard tank set it usually runs in Gen 9. It was going back to older Garchomp trends with a mixed attacking Garchomp. The only moves revealed on this were Draco Meteor, Life Orb, and Stealth Rock. Instead of running spikes, it seems Hisuian Samurott is tasked with setting the spikes, and this is a very aggressive hazard stacking strategy where a Glamora is also present to get toxic spikes on the field. And Goldengo is here with Air Balloon to block hazard removal at all costs. Although Garchomp's older aggressive sets haven't been as popular in Gen 9, I think they still have some merit, because Garchomp has a unique set of offensive tools that no other utility ground type can quite match. That Stab Draco Meteor is still able to catch Pokemon like Great Tusk or Tinglu or Alamamola, physical switch-ins, off guard with unexpectedly high power special damage. I would imagine this set has either Earthquake or Fire Blast, which are also great options to hit common switch-ins and threaten a wide variety of things. Unfortunately for ZS, they risked a significant amount of HP early to get an unexpected Draco Meteor through and chip Ogerpon Wellspring, but it turned out to be Synthesis Ogerpon Wellspring that simply healed off all the damage it just took and thwarted that plan completely. A bit of an unfortunate matchup moment there, but you could see how this unexpected Draco Meteor from Garchomp could have some real value in Gen 9 in similar interactions, unexpectedly dealing higher damage than thought possible. I think perhaps this upward trends in Garchomp usage is because people are realizing it actually is quite a reliable hazard stacker to build a strategy around. And beyond that role, it has a vast move pool that can create surprise value. It is a versatile Pokemon even to this day, just barely keeping up with modern power creep. I don't think it is as good as the other ground types in the format. Great Tusk has better offensive stab and rapid spin. Gliscor has Poison Heal, which is just broken. And Landorus Therian has Intimidate and the overall superior ground flying typing. But Garchomp does still stand out in its own way. It has reasons to still be used and be metagame relevant. People are bringing it in SPL as recently as last month. People are topping ladder with it, with a couple different examples. After so many years of competitive excellence and viability in every generation it's existent in, Garchomp does not want to go out with a whimper. Perhaps we have forgotten about Garchomp and forgotten to give it the respect it deserves. Garchomp has had to reinvent itself a little bit, with its most common set now becoming a defensive tank set. But those old sets of the past may just still have their place. As it stands, Garchomp has a 5.275% usage in Gen 9 OU at the moment, outranking Dondozo, Walking Wake, Rillaboom, Meowscarada. The TF shifts have not dropped quite yet, but there is a very good chance that Garchomp will in fact rise up to OU status once again to reclaim its title of OU mainstay. Metagames often work in a cyclical manner, and forgotten Pokemon rise up when they're needed. I don't believe this is forced. I don't believe people are using Garchomp just because they like it, because of its iconic status and competitive. I think that it's genuinely rising up to fill a space that nothing else can fill, and that this is indicative of its inherent strengths that it has always had. Its versatility, its great typing, and ability to adapt to different situations. I made the prediction in my video covering BL Pokemon that I thought Okidogi would be the first of the bunch to rise back up to OU, but it's actually looking like it'll probably be Garchomp. And I can't be too upset about that. But what do you think, folks? Do you think it is in fact Garchover, and this is just a temporary trend, and as the cycle progresses, Garchomp will fade away once again? When Gen 9 is over, where do you think Garchomp will end up? OU or back down to UUBL. Something tells me this is just a temporary trend of a Garchomp uptick and he will fall back down again, but I would love to believe that Garchomp can cling onto OU viability for perhaps the last time, proving the haters wrong and the doubters. But we will have to wait and see. I would love to hear your predictions down below in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching.